You know that feeling when you're sitting at a dinner table and everyone else has their phones out, angled just right to capture the steam rising from their pasta. Or maybe they're leaning in for that perfectly lit group selfie that'll be posted before the appetizers even arrive. You're sitting there, just watching them, and you feel this weird, itchy sensation like you're the only person actually in the room, while everyone else is currently busy auditioning for an audience that isn't even there. It's that odd, quiet disconnect where you realize that for most people, the moment doesn't really count unless it's documented, time-stamped, and validated by a little heart icon. But then, there are the others, the ones who just don't. They have the same sunsets, the same great meals, the same major life milestones, but their digital footprint is a ghost town. My name is Frankie, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, human psychology, and why some people seem to glide through life with this incredible sense of privacy, while others are constantly stressed about their public digital image. I've always been fascinated by that choice to be invisible, because in 2026, being digitally unseen is basically a revolutionary act. It makes you wonder what they know that the rest of us are still trying to figure out, you know? It's not just about being shy or tech illiterate. There is a deep, complex psychological machinery behind the decision to opt out of the digital circus. And honestly, understanding it might be the key to reclaiming a version of ourselves that we've almost entirely forgotten. When we talk about digital invisibility, we have to start with the people who were basically forged in a world where your mistakes didn't live forever in a cloud server. If you look at Generation X, born roughly between 1965 and 1980, you're looking at a group that built the very foundations of the internet. But curiously, they don't feel the need to post about their breakfast every single morning. To them, privacy isn't some luxury or a suspicious secret. It was just the default setting of their entire youth. When they messed up as kids, and let's be real, they messed up a lot, maybe only a handful of people ever knew, and that was simply the end of it. There were no viral videos of their awkward basement phases or parking lot mishaps. This created a psychological environment where the less people knew about you, the safer you actually felt. For them, the idea of blasting their private life out for strangers to scroll through doesn't feel like an exciting opportunity for connection. It feels inherently risky. They basically turned irony and distance into a shield. If you can crack a joke and keep things at arm's length, you can protect yourself before anything actually stings. It's this emotional armor that makes them look at social media and see a minefield rather than a playground. They spent their formative years watching authority figures fumble major crises and saw the rules of stability change right in front of them, which taught them to be fiercely loyal to their own competence, but deeply skeptical of anything that requires external validation. This skepticism often manifests as what psychologists call defensive pessimism, but if you ask them, they just call it being realistic. They cross their fingers for good things, but deep down, they're always expecting the rug to get pulled out because, honestly, that's what kept happening throughout their lives. This bridge generation grew up in the shadow of the Cold War, performing duck and cover drills in school, as if a wooden desk could save them from a nuclear blast. When the adults in your life act like the world is about to go up in smoke, but tell you not to worry, you learn to hold two clashing ideas at once and keep a little distance just in case. That distance is exactly what we see today in their digital habits. They don't post about their work. They just do it. They don't need a digital resume because their work ethic was forged through paper routes at 5 a.m. and bagging groceries where you had to do the math in your head. For these people, being visible is synonymous with being vulnerable, and they've spent a lifetime learning how to handle things on their own without needing a digital audience to cheer them on. But it's not just an age thing. There's also a specific group of people who choose invisibility because they've simply endured too much to care about the triviality of online performance. You've probably met someone who laughs at things that would send most people into a total spiral, right? They've been through experiences that fundamentally rewired how they see the world. When you've survived your own massive storms, other people's little rain showers just hit differently. Their brains operate on a different frequency. It's not broken, it's just trained by necessity to be a survival masterpiece. These individuals often develop a kind of immunity to life's chaos. They aren't cynical, though they're often the most aggressively empathetic people you'll ever meet because they've memorized the language of pain so fluently. They can sense a shift in the atmosphere or a forced smile from a mile away. They see the emotional temperature of a room while everyone else is just looking at the furniture. For these people, Digital invisibility is often a way to manage their hyper-vigilance. Their threat detection system never really turns off, which is why they might be the ones always sitting with their back to the wall in a restaurant or having 17 backup plans for a simple coffee date. When your nervous system has learned the hard way that safety is a luxury, not a guarantee, you don't go looking for more exposure. They often downplay their own struggles, telling themselves they're fine because admitting defeat feels like a failure of their survival mechanisms. They are walking paradoxes, tough but tender, guarded but generous. They use humor, often dark humor, as armor to take the power away from their pain. Every joke is a tiny rebellion against the things that tried to break them. They might micromanage the smallest details of their day while being eerily zen about massive life uncertainties, because they've learned that the big stuff is out of their control anyway. There is a quiet grief underneath it all, a mourning for the version of themselves that used to trust easily or laugh without checking the room first. They're homesick for a softness they didn't get to keep, and being digitally invisible is one way they protect whatever softness is left. Then there are those who grew up too fast, children who were forced into adult roles before they even hit their teens. Psychologists call this parentification, where a child takes on responsibilities that should belong to the adults in the house. This creates a version of exceptional maturity that is actually just a survival adaptation. These kids learn to read their parents' moods the second they walk through the door, and to solve problems because there simply wasn't another option. As adults, they become the reliable ones that everyone else leans on in a crisis. But they struggle with the simplest things, like asking for help or resting without feeling guilty. To them, rest feels dangerous because their childhood taught them that stability depends entirely on their ability to hold everything together. They built an entire operating system around being useful, and that system is still running in the background of their lives. In the digital age, these over-functioning adults often find the performative nature of social media to be an exhausting form of emotional labor they've already been doing for decades. They're already experts at managing other people's emotions and diffusing conflict before it even starts. Adding the pressure of digital visibility feels like one more weight they can't afford to carry. They often feel alone, even when surrounded by people, because no one sees how hard they're working to keep everything smooth. For them, healing often involves grieving the childhood they didn't get to have, and realizing that their worth isn't tied to how much they produce or how well they manage others. They have to learn that it's safe to let someone else take the wheel, and that being digitally invisible might actually be the first step toward finally letting go. We also have to consider the Xennials, that micro-generation born between 1976 and 1985. These people are the ultimate digital analog hybrids. They remember rotary phones and the dread of missing a favorite TV show. But they were also the ones registering for MySpace and Facebook as young adults. Because their brains were still in a high state of plasticity when the world went digital, they developed a rare kind of bilingualism. They can have a deep face-to-face conversation without checking their phone every 30 seconds, but they aren't intimidated by new software either. They remember what it felt like to be genuinely unreachable for hours, an experience that is becoming extinct. Xennials often have a very different relationship with privacy because their most embarrassing moments just faded into memory instead of being permanently documented online. They lived through the 2008 financial crisis right as they were trying to build their careers, which left many with a lingering sense of economic trauma. This combination of childhood self-reliance and early adulthood instability created a generation that is independent and cooperative, doubtful yet optimistic. They see what was gained with technology, but they also acutely feel what was lost. The patience that comes from waiting and the ability to be truly alone with your thoughts. Their digital invisibility is often a conscious choice to reclaim that presence. Think about the physical reality of a pre-digital childhood for a second. It was a world where you could be 6 years old, standing on the front seat of your dad's car with no seatbelt, steering the wheel while he worked the pedals. By today's standards, that's considered reckless. But back then, it was a lesson in trust and responsibility. You learned to wait in the car while your mum went into the shop, building an internal compass and a sense of safety that didn't depend on a tracking app. The neighborhood was a vast territory that you mastered on your bike, following the sound of shouting or the pile of bikes on a lawn rather than a blue dot on a GPS. You learned the raw physics of the world by building forts out of scrap plywood and pulling rusty nails with a hammer. When you fell and scraped your knee, Your mum told you to wash it off and get back outside, which built a kind of anti-fragility that is hard to find now. In that analog world, things weren't black boxes. You could see the gears and smell the grease. If your bike chain slipped, you flipped the bike over and fixed it yourself, developing a mechanical intuition and a belief that you could master the physical world with enough patience and a screwdriver. This grit carried over into your first jobs, like folding heavy Sunday newspapers at 5 a.m. or calculating change by hand when the register jammed. You learned the value of $1 because you knew exactly how many floors you had to mop to earn it. Every phone call was an exercise in social courage because you had to navigate the gatekeeper parents to talk to your friend. You had the freedom to be messy and try on different versions of yourself in private, away from the constant noise of instant feedback. When someone refuses to post on social media today, they are often trying to protect that sense of psychological ownership over their own lives. They've recognized that sharing something meaningful often means trading that ownership for validation. The moment stops being yours and starts becoming content. Every caption becomes a script, and every photo becomes a stage for a performance aimed at triggering dopamine releases. People who resist this cycle often have a strong internal locus of control. They don't need strangers to confirm their happiness, because they can just feel it. They've realized that digital visibility comes with a self-presentational pressure that can be genuinely unbearable. When they step away, they start to see which relationships were built on genuine interest rather than social media transactions. There's also a darker side to disappearing. Some people don't vanish because they hate everyone. They vanish because staying became heavier than leaving. They might reply slower or cancel plans more often, until one day they're just gone. From the outside, it looks cold, but from the inside, it feels like survival. These are often the people who have been the strong ones, the fixers, and the listeners for way too long. They reached a point of emotional saturation where they've given everything and feel entirely empty. They learned early on that their needs were inconvenient, so they became low maintenance until they simply hit a breaking point. For them, relationships often feel all or nothing because vulnerability has been punished in the past. Distance feels safer than the inevitable disappointment they've come to expect. Cutting everyone off brings a silence that can be both a relief and incredibly loud. It provides breathing room for the nervous system to finally slow down, but it also removes the mirrors that remind us who we are. Humans are relational creatures, and when we disconnect entirely, our minds start filling in the gaps with self-criticism and unresolved memories. Buried feelings of sadness and anger start to surface because distance amplifies what we've ignored. The danger is that solitude can stop being restorative and start being isolating. People might start to feel emotionally flat, where life is manageable but no longer meaningful. They connect with people on a functional level, but they don't feel safe enough to stay. The real work for someone in this position isn't about letting everyone back in. It's about learning discernment. It's about realizing that you're allowed to choose who gets access to you, and that loyalty doesn't have to mean endurance. It's about learning how to say no without disappearing, and how to express needs without apologizing for them. It's about unlearning the survival strategy of showing up fully or not at all, and realizing that real connection happens in the partial presence of being human and tired. Healing means learning how to keep some doors open without standing in the doorway bleeding. Being digitally invisible, whether it's a lifelong habit or a recent choice, is often about searching for a way to belong without sacrificing your true self. It's an admission that privacy isn't loneliness, and that being unseen doesn't mean you're insignificant. Sometimes the truest way to exist is quietly and fully, without needing the world to witness every single moment. It's about rediscovering your own thoughts beneath the constant digital noise. These individuals aren't just withdrawal. They are practicing a form of presence that is becoming increasingly rare. If you're someone who feels that pull toward invisibility, or if you're just tired of the performance, know that your desire for a quieter, more private life is completely valid. It's not a character flaw to want your moments to stay yours. It's a response to a world that demands too much of our attention and our emotional energy. You don't have to be a human doing who constantly produces content for an audience. You are allowed to just be a human being. You are allowed to rest, to not have all the answers, and to even fall apart sometimes without it being documented. The child in you who learned to hold everything together did an incredible job, but they can rest now. It is safe to let go of the need to be seen and to just be young at heart, even if you're coming to it a little late. We don't all have to experience the world through a screen, and honestly, That diversity of experience is the only reason society still functions at all. So, the next time you feel like the only one not posting the pasta, just take a breath and enjoy the steam. It's your moment, and you don't owe it to anyone else. If you're interested in exploring more of these deep psychological dives into how our minds really work in this modern world, would you like me to look into why some people find modern entertainment, like the Super Bowl, completely unstimulating?